Now, let us look at the main centers of slave trade in West Africa. So on Gold Coast, Gold Coast is Ghana. There was Fort James, that is Accra. Cape Coast, Anomabu, belonging to the English. That is, all these areas, they were for the English, that is for England. And there was also Krekua, Krevekua, and Elmina, belonging to the Dutch, that is Holland, and Christianborg, belonging to the Danes, that is Denmark, and Fante and Asante slaves, also known as Coromantes, were the brave and tough. So the Fante and Asante slaves, they were taken to be very strong slaves. On the slave coast, there was Whydah, Brass, Bone, and these ones, they were important centers there at the coast. And also the French dominated Senegal. They had its center, the slave trade had its center on the island of Gori, of what is now called Dakar. So those are the centers. In Angola, there was Luanda, was the biggest slave port, and slaves were shipped largely to Brazil by the Portuguese. In Angola, the Portuguese dominated there. They were shipping their slaves to Brazil. So others were shipped to USA by the English as well from Angola. And other areas included Buenos Island in Sierra Leone River, Plantain Island, Shebo Island, and the Grand Coast, that is Liberia. So all these areas that we have mentioned here, they were the slave centers in West Africa. So let us look at the ethnic groups. Who were the ethnic groups that were taken as slaves from Africa? There were the Bakongo of the DRC and Angola, the Mande of Upper Guinea, the Bay speakers of Togo, Ghana, and Benin, the Akan of Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, the Wolof of Senegal and Gambia. So all these were the ethnic groups that were taken as slaves to or from Africa. There were also the Igbo of southern Nigeria, the Mbundu of Angola, the Yoruba of southwestern Nigeria, the Chamba of Cameroon, the Makua of Mozambique. So you can see there were so many ethnic tribes that were taken as slaves from Western Africa or from Africa. Here now, we are going to start looking at the Great Triangle route. The Great Triangle route. So this one, it was begun by the Englishman named John Hawkins, who visited West Africa in 1562, 1564, and 1567. So his aim was to carry manufactured goods from Europe and exchange them for slaves in Africa. So the slaves then were taken to America, where they were exchanged for silver and later tobacco and sugar. So the Great Triangle trade involved the Portuguese, the Dutch, the British, the French, the Danes, the Germans. So all these people from these countries, they were the ones who were involved in the Great Triangle slave trade. So the Dutch, through the Dutch West India Company, they drove the Portuguese from their trading position in Guinea. So the Dutch they displaced the Portuguese in Guinea. And later the French drove away the Dutch out of Gori. So we see to it that they were also fighting for dominion in different places. The first, let us look at the three triangular routes. The first stage involved taking manufactured goods from Europe to Africa. For example, they were taking silk, cotton, spirits, tobacco, beads, cowrie shells, metal goods, cheap ornaments such as earrings, necklaces, guns and gunpowder, and even alcohol. So the guns were used to expand the empires that is in Africa now. So these goods, they were exchanged for African slaves. So when the Europeans were coming, they were bringing in a lot of goods, manufactured goods from there in exchange for slaves. So the second stage was the Middle Passage, since it was transporting West African human cargo across the Atlantic to be sold in America. So that was now the transportation, the Middle Passage. It was now from Africa to America. The first stage, Europe to Africa. Second one, the Middle Passage, that is from Africa to America. The third and final stage involved the return with the return to Europe with the produce from the slave labor plantations of the Caribbean and the American cotton, sugar, tobacco, molasses, and rum. So from America now, they were getting a lot of things now to Europe. So it was a complete triangle there to say they started from Europe, coming to Africa, West Africa, then to America, then to back to Europe. So we have said that from Europe, they were carrying manufactured goods in exchange for slaves. Slaves were taken through the Middle Passage to America. Then in America, they were taking the things that were produced by slave labor. We talk of tobacco, cotton, sugar, all those things, they were taken back now to Europe. They were sold there and people were enjoying much in Europe there. So that was the Great Triangle slave trade. So we see to it that this trade, it really benefited a lot the people of Europe, because it was like in Africa, they were taking human resource, and that in USA, they were taking the produce enjoyed in USA. So while they were enjoying those produce in Europe now, that's why maybe we can say Europe now developed a lot in as far as trade was concerned, because all the Europeans were coming to Africa, get the slaves here, bring them to the farms in America, and get the produce from America, enjoy the benefits in Europe. So let's look at the Middle Passage. We have talked of the Middle Passage. It was the passage between Africa and America. So what were the conditions of slaves on the Middle Passage? Number one, we are saying that they were packed like books in or on a bookshelf in those ships. So they were just packed like books, just as we put the books on the bookshelf. And there they were put badly there, and they died of, they were fed badly. They were given food not enough, and they could die of suffocation and starvation. The sick slaves were regarded as threats to the whole cargo. Hence, they were thrown into the sea while still alive. So, really, that was bad. In the Middle Passage, things were not okay, I tell you. And again, some slaves denied food, but they were forced to take the food. Others committed suicide by jumping into the sea if they failed to endure the conditions. So the conditions also resulted in the spread of fatal diseases. So the conditions there, they were not okay in the ship. So a lot of things were happening. Now, after they reached America, what were the conditions on the plantations? They were branded like cows and scrambled for like goods at the market. So there, they were branded just as we have said that they were given the hot mark, or by the hot iron, they were given a mark on their bodies. and there was a scramble, like an auction at the market. They were tortured like prisoners. They are forced to work from dawn until dusk, from morning until evening, each and every day. They were just given enough food to keep them alive and able to toil more. So the food that they were given, just small to keep them alive and keep on working. So they were not taken as human beings. They were basically taken as animals. They were taken as the things or properties to use just like that. Now, let us look at the abolition of slave trade. We have looked at the inhuman activities that were done on people from Africa, especially West Africa. That's what we are talking about here. Now, at some point in time, then there was that abolition of slave trade. That is now stopping, dissolution, or to dissolve slave trade, to say, no, 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 enough is enough. We have tortured the people of Africa and it's enough. So opposition against slave trade started with religious society friends who were known as the Quakers and evangelicals like William Wilberforce. So Denmark was the first country to ban the trade, that is slave trade, through the registration in 1772, which took effect in 1803. So by 1772, Denmark said, no, we have done enough. These are also people, let them live their lives. So in 1803, that act took place. So Britain banned slave trade in 1807, imposing stiff fines for any slave found aboard British ship. So the Royal Navy controlled the sea and moved to stop other nations from continuing the slave trade. So when Britain did it in 1807, it also moved to stop other nations from slave trade. So it also declared that slaving was equal to piracy and was punishable by death. To say anyone found trading in slaves was to be punished by death. So the United States Congress passed the Slave Trade Act in 1724, which prohibited the building or outfitting of ships in the USA for use in the slave trade. So in 1807, Congress outlawed the importation of slaves beginning 1st January 1809. So the USA also did the same by condemning slave trade. So reasons why traders or slave trade lasted so long. So we are saying that even though there was that abolition of slave trade, but it continued. But why it lasted long? Number one, it was a profitable business because Europeans, they they profited a great deal from this slave trade. And number two, the belief that only African slaves could do hard work. So Africans were resistant to most of the harsh conditions. So others, they believe that this work can only be done by Africans. They are more powerful than others. So that's why it prolonged. And also acceptance of slavery in Europe and Africa. So it was legalized, a legalized trade in Europe as well as Africa, also served as one way of dealing with the offenders. So like in Africa, we mentioned this to say they put some laws to say all offenders, they were to be sold as slaves. So it was acceptable business. Ignorance of reality of the trade. So Europeans were not aware of the plight of the victims. So most of the Europeans who supported in Europe there, they did not know exactly what happened in the Middle Passage or what happened in the plantations to say that the victims or those slaves, they were suffering a lot. And owners of the plantations, they had great political power and influence in Europe. So the owners of the plantations, mind you, usually the owners of the plantations in America, they were in Europe. So they had that political power. As such, they could do, they were still supporting it to say they were the prime beneficiaries again, and they had political voice. Hence, the slave trade continued. So here, let us look at the stages in the abolition of slave trade. What were the stages in the abolition of slave trade. So first, we are going to look at the reasons for the abolition. What were the reasons? Some of the reasons why slave trade was abolished. Number one, the law of philosophers, literary figures, and evangelists. So some philosophers started to argue, and other educated people, and as well as evangelists, they started to argue to say, no, 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 this one is not good at all. And also the writers such as Jean-Jacques Rousseau and political economists such as Adam Smith, they drew men's attention to the equality of mankind and freedom of the individual. So many people argued against slave trade. So it gave rise to such liberal ideas such as those of liberty, equality, and the fraternity. So those ideas were advocated for equality, something like that. So the preaching of evangelists in both America and Britain, such as John Wesley and the Quakers, in which they condemned inhumane slave trade in the coast of Africa. So basically, we see to it that the Christians or Christian evangelists, they took much part in abolishing this slave trade, in sensitizing the people to say, no, this is an inhuman activity. We are all equal as human beings. Let them, those slaves, live their lives freely. In 1783, the Quakers set a committee of six to release and liberate Negro slaves in West Indies and discouraged slave trade in the on the coast of Africa. So they set a committee, the Quakers, those evangelists, they said, no, 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 we are setting now a committee to abolish this slave trade, to liberate all those people who have been captured as slaves in west coast of Africa. So Thomas Clarkson and Granville Sharp also condemned the slave trade. So William Wilberforce, a humanitarian, he became the chief spokesperson in the parliament for the cause of anti-slave movement. So William Wilberforce in Britain there, he did a lot to condemn this one, to say, no, 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 this slavery cannot go on. Changing the economic factors. So this made people in Europe and Britain less interested in the continuation of slave trade. So the changing economic factors was another reason why slave trade was abolished. So we are saying that there was a change. The people now became less interested in the continuation of slave trade. Number one, development of industrial revolution in Europe and America. Now they created the machines that were able to use to do the work that were done by people or slaves. Decreasing the value of slaves. Large production of manufactured goods increased in Britain, hence suffocating the value of slaves. So there was increase in the production in the manufactured goods that was there in Europe. So with that, then the value of slaves declined, and also the priority of African production at home. So the priority of African production at home. Most Africans, they started growing crops in their respective society, which were used in the industries in Britain and Europe. So what happened was that now, instead of now Europe depending on those produce from America, they also encouraged Africans to say, no, embark on growing, or going to buy from you direct to Europe, like that. Hence, it happened like there was a decline in the demand for produce in America. And also the defeat of the French and the Dutch. So after Britain defeated the two countries, they started supporting the abolishment of slave trade in Parliament, hence blocking the supply of slaves to Britain. So after these two countries were defeated, France and the Holland, by Britain, then they also supported the abolition of slave trade. Also, expansion of sugar production elsewhere. Britain started producing sugar, therefore, no need to continue transporting slaves to the New World's plantations. So, Britain also started producing the same produce that were done in America. So, there was no need to scramble for the goods that were produced by slaves in America. And also the emergence of special interest in Britain. So, in 1788, Britain started to explore Africa's scientific and geographical information as well as economic potentialities, that is the rich resources and open markets. So Britain started to explore Africa scientifically and as well to find more geographical information in Africa to say, can there be anything of use in Africa that can be used in the world? So it was established that now the interest was to find something new in Africa that can be beneficial to the world, apart from slaves. So frequent slave revolts. So it brought change of mind and helped the cause of the anti-slave trade movement. So the slave revolts, even in the plantations there, sometimes the slaves, they could gang up and start to revolt there for the working conditions because they were not okay. So let us look at the main course in the process of abolition of slave trade. What happened in the course of abolition of slave trade? So in the process, it had mainly 7 main forms of abolition. So number 1 were the early protest by the popes and African leaders. So the popes in 1514, Pope Leo number 10 protested that slave trade and any slavery were abhorrent to the Christian religion. So he was supported by Pope Pius number 2 in the 15th century. So Pope Paul number 3 in the 16th century, and also Pope Benedict number 15 in the 18th century. So all these popes, they condemned the slave trade to say it is an inhuman and against Christian religion. And also the African leaders, most of the African leaders expressed strong protest against slave trade. So in 1526, King Nzinga Wemba of Congo, wrote King of Portugal and requested him to stop his men from buying slaves in his kingdom. So in 1789, Alwada Equiano and Gustavus Visa, an Igbo slave, addressed a book at the British Parliament which aimed at the abolition of slave trade. So we see even Africans, they also took part to say no, many people have been taken here and Africa has been depleted of its resources. Apart from protests now by the popes and African leaders, another stage was the abolition by legislation, the parliament. So it began in 1772, in which the Chief Justice of England, who was Lord Mansfield, he gave judgment in favor of a slave, James Somerset. So Granville Sharp filed a motion to assert his freedom from his master. So it was the Granville Sharp. He said, no, this slave, James Somerset, must be set free. So there it shows that even the parliament there or the judiciary, they were against this. So these individuals ruled that slavery was evil and heartless. So within 5 years, over 80,000 slaves in the United Kingdom were set free. Humanitarians led by Granville Sharp, William Wilberforce, Thomas Clarkson, took the lead to persuade the parliament to abolish slave trade. So even in Britain there, they released the slaves, about 80,000, they were set free to say no more slavery, and those people were set free. But between 1772 and 1805, the motions to abolish slave trade were lost because of the vested members of parliament and fear in the Britain of the French revolutionary idea. So between 1772 and 1805, it was like that motions of abolishing slave trade, it went down because of a number of reasons. One of it is the French revolutionary ideas. So in 1807, the battle was won. An act of parliament was passed making slave trade illegal in USA. So by 1807, then it was passed to say slave trade, it is not an allowed business in UK. So in 1833, on 28th August, slavery was illegal in UK and the entire British Empire, and in 1834, it was abolished in the British West Indies. So Britain started to abolish slave trade even in its colonies. The third one was the abolition through diplomatic treaties. So Britain made treaties with other powers, seizing ships actually carried slaves. So other nations followed Britain abolishing slave trade, and Denmark had actually declared it illegal in 1804. USA abolished in 1808, and Sweden abolished it in 1813, and Netherlands abolished in 1814, and France abolished in 1818. So you see to it, after Britain, then Britain agreed with other countries, other powers, then other countries, they followed suit, and they started to abolish slave trade in different years. Establishment now of naval patrols. The naval patrols were established. So the British established the naval patrols on the west coast to capture and seize slave boats and free the slaves. So the ships, boats were sought or broken up in Destruction Bay, and slaves were released. So when they capture those ships that were carrying slaves, they could break the boats or sell the ships and free the slaves. So slave captains were tried in Freetown by courts of mixed commission judges, and judges came up from Spain, Portugal, and Britain. So what happened was that there was they set up in Freetown, that is Freetown, sit in West Africa. There was Freetown, whereby they put the judges there. So those judges were from Spain, Portugal, and Britain, so that they were just waiting to say, all right, we have captured these people who were still transporting slaves. So they were tried in those by those judges. So Britain maintained a judge there permanently. So even after that exercise, Britain maintained their judge there permanently. Another way was abolition through Christian and legitimate trade. So Britain helped to stop slave trade by using missionaries and legitimate trade in the interior part of Africa to ensure that the routes of slave trade were cut. So they tried to do that to say, all right, we need to establish legitimate trade and not slave trade. So Christianity and legitimate commerce replaced slave trade. So the missionaries, they wanted to repair the harm done by the human trade for the success of their work. So they put the message of brotherhood and equality in of mankind, and the missionaries decampaigned slave trade. So what happened was that the missionaries now try to preach of the brotherhood messages to say, right, we are all equal. We are equal in the eyes of God. So they were trying like to cool down the effects of that slave trade. The other way now, the other way of or other stage of Abolition was the Reform Acts and abolition of rotten boroughs in 1832. So in 1832, the British Reforms Act abolished some of the rotten boroughs. So their rotten seats in parliament were um, to the new powerful were given to the new powerful industrialists and other middle class people. So the new members saw economic advantages in the abolition of slavery, and parliament therefore passed the act abolishing slavery in 1833. So in 1834, slavery was abolished in the British West Indies. So here, what we mean by the rotten boroughs, it means that those people, we have said that they were the people who had the plantations in America. They were also influential politically in Britain. They were like the members of parliament again there. So their seats were abolished in the parliament. So right, you are doing slavery, you are doing as political figures, your seats have been abolished. Now their seats they were taken by other people. Now those people who took over then, they still more emphasized on abolishing of slavery even elsewhere. So that's why we see even the West Indies, it was also abolished. And the final method was the American Civil War and abolition in the USA. The American Civil War and the abolition in the USA. So by 1800, there was no slaves in north of Maryland. In 1802, slave trade was made illegal between Africa and America. That is, the middle passage was abolished. America was divided into free states and slave states because the North allowed to abolish slavery while the southern states refused to abolish slavery. So the South refused to abolish slave trade because of the large cotton and tobacco estates had come to depend on the were depending on the slave labor. So it was the election of Abraham Lincoln as the 16th president of the USA in 1861 that started that conflict to say, by this time now, we need to abolish slave trade throughout the USA.